Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming here tonight to the Philomath City Council meeting for September 12th of 2022. Tonight we have on our agenda a public hearing on our Philomath Municipal Code on flood hazard overlays. Also a presentation from the Oregon Cascade West Council of Government. We also have time for a public comment, and then we have some new business, including the records retention of audio and video recordings. We're going to be discussing the social service agency grants, do a first reading of our ordinance for our franchise agreement with Alyrica, and then we have our council and staff reports. But before we get started, we're going to go ahead and have, well, I wanted to welcome the community here. It's great to see you all here. We're happy to have you participate in your local governance. We're first going to get started with a roll call.
Jessica Andrade.
Present.
Catherine Bisco. Here. Ruth Causey. Here. Matt Lehman.
Here.
David Lowe.
Here.
Teresa Nielsen.
Here.
Chaz Jones.
Here. Excellent. Thank you. First, we're going to get started with our public hearing. And I have a script because public hearings are complicated.
Mayor, before we go into the public hearing, if I could visit with council for just a minute. And this is a little bit off the agenda, but item H1 is a report from Councilor Bisco about Mill Pond Crossing. My professional opinion is that we need to have a frank and forthright conversation about those things, and that litigation is likely to file, whether it's likely to be filed. It's not really clear yet what the city's participation in that would be. There are lots of issues there. I don't think this is something that we can deal with tonight after this meeting, but what I'd ask the council to do is to consider scheduling an executive session as kind of a work session, executive session on the 26th on your regular meeting date. And unless there's an objection, I think that gives me and the city manager some time to kind of pull things apart, put things together into timelines, and to provide some information for the council, and we can have a conversation about it. I'm not seeing any objections. I don't know that you need a motion, but if that's satisfactory to everybody, we'll be prepared. It may be that you're going to need more than one executive session on this. I wanted to let people in the public who might have been coming to hear the discussion of this know that that is not likely to happen tonight. They can certainly address you.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yes, so with that, we do have our public hearing on PC 22-05 amendments to the Philomath Municipal Code Chapter 18.55.100 on flood hazard overlay. But first, I want to welcome citizens of Philomath. And Chris, did you want the summary provided by staff? Did you want to go over that, or just go through the topic title?
We go through there. I'll just provide the staff report.
So tonight, in tonight's order of proceedings, we're first going to have our staff report, then we're going to have public testimony. Then we'll take council questions of staff, and then we will, as a council, deliberate before we make a final recommendation on this topic. And for anyone testifying this evening, we please ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes. And this is specific to the public hearing, not the public comments. Those of you that are going to be offering public comment will be addressing the council a little bit later. So anyone testifying either orally or in writing may request a continuance or a request to keep the record open. These requests should be included in your testimony. And with that, we're going to go ahead and open the public hearing. Does any city councilor wish to declare a potential or actual conflict of interest? Seeing none, does the land use decisions such as this case are under consideration this evening are evaluated against the applicable statewide planning goals and guidelines and criteria from the Land Development Code and Comprehensive Plan as presented in the staff report. And we are now going to proceed to the staff report. Chris?
Great, thank you, Honor. So what we're looking at is amendments to a portion of the development code. This is chapter 18.55.100. It's a flood hazard overlay. And so there's several chapters in here, but it's all 18.55. Looking to protect our floodways. Really what it's looking at is restrictions to development within that floodway and floodplain in order to protect it and protect neighboring properties, especially those that are downstream. So there's a lot of provisions in here. We actually were reached out to from FEMA, gentleman, what was the name? Sorry, Mitch Payne out of Seattle actually flew down and sat with me for a while. Worked with Pat Deppa, the city planner, for quite a while. Worked with Ruth to look through our code. Actually went through line by line and did an audit of our code and made several recommendations on things that needed to be changed, and then recommendations on things that he recommended be changed. The city planner went through, updated that in our code. I kind of gave you a red line version. That went to the planning commission. They had a few revisions and tweaks to some of the language there. And in the end, after those tweaks, approved and recommended approval to the city council to consider it, which is why it's before you tonight. The process to follow in updating the development code is outlined on the second page of the staff report. We're going to look at statewide planning goals, comments from any federal or state agencies, any applicable intergovernmental agreements, and then any applicable comprehensive plan policies, provisions to the code. City planner again went through each of those considerations and found that the city had followed our proper requirements for a notification to the public, also for adherence to any state or federal agencies. Again, mostly we were responding and working directly with FEMA on this, but then also notice was given to Department of Land Conservation Development. They're required to give 30-day notice prior to first hearing that took place. And so and then the kind of the last on the comprehensive plan policies, one of the first things looked at is the citizen involvement policy. The manner in which the public is invited to take part in these types of decisions is to be involved in the public hearings. And we had a hearing at the planning commission level. We're having a hearing tonight as well that was noticed. So anybody from the public that has comments or concerns is welcome to address the city council during this hearing tonight. Won't go through each of these in detail, but again, looked at the housing policies in particular and how these changes would impact the housing policies, and the findings from Mr. Deppa, I'm on the top of page 4, was that the updated code will continue to guide and protect existing and future dwellings through environmental and sustainable construction methods. It will strengthen our approach in mitigating future and existing hazards, assist in best practices towards construction, and assist the county building division in their review of projects. By county, it's county and city. So we cooperate with the county and those larger floodplain issues. He's got a recommended motion, but I'd turn your attention with the help of Councilor Lowe earlier today. The motion more accurate that reflects the staff report with the proper date is actually in the agenda item summary, which precedes the staff report. So when we get to that point to make a motion, direct your attention to the agenda item summary, not the recommended motion in the staff report itself. Wording is just a little bit different. My preference is to reference the correct staff report as opposed to just the planning file. With that, I will conclude my report.
Excellent. Are there any preliminary questions of staff at this point? Noting that there will be an opportunity to ask additional questions of staff after the public testimony. Okay. So with that, we will now move to public testimony. Before you make any comments, please sign in with your name and address, and please keep your comments to 3 minutes. And provide any written materials that you wish to be part of the official record. City Recorder, do we have anyone signed up to speak in the public hearing?
No, I do not have anyone signed up, and we have not received any written testimony.
Is there anyone here to speak on the public hearing? Great. So well, with that, we'll just close the public hearing. And does any city councilor have questions of staff at this point? Councilor Lehman.
Yep, I think I saw in there somewhere that if we need to make these adjustments to remain eligible to receive FEMA funding moving forward. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so the federal government looks to the local jurisdictions to implement and to enforce these development standards when they're in the floodplains. Failure to do so, if you had a lot of violations there and you weren't upholding it, or if it wasn't current, we refused to update it. What you'd find is that homes within Philomath's jurisdiction that needed flood insurance wouldn't be eligible for it any longer. So it is important that we comply with this federal mandate as much as we don't like the federal government telling us what to do when it comes to floodplain. As long as they're the insurer, that's what you're looking at. Is nobody's getting kicked out of their house, they may just not be able to purchase flood insurance any longer. So,
And
or the rates would go up
if I
substantially.
could add to that, if there is a flooding disaster, then your ability to get assistance from FEMA for a declared disaster is also compromised. So there are 2 financial consequences.
Thanks. Councilor Lowe.
I have 2 questions. The first one has to do with existing floodplain, what we are used to within the community. Does any of this change the interpretation of where things are right now?
No, this update doesn't change any of the existing floodplain. It's really more about some of it's updating definitions. But again, those updated definitions didn't move any lines or anything based on a new definition. A lot of them were clarifying statements, I guess, not to overgeneralize because there are a lot of different parts here, but some of it was, again, just updating definitions, clarifying language. Some of it was literally just rephrasing how a sentence was put so it better complied with the intent that FEMA wanted to see in our code. So there's a lot of red line here, but again, as you go through it line by line, there's not a lot of meat and potatoes here. It's pretty straightforward, and it's a lot of just their boilerplate language as opposed to what we've got. I will say the city does a good job of adhering to this. Ruth Post does a great job in overseeing this, and Pat Deppa as well, on making sure that we're getting the right documents. We're making sure that the development in the floodplain is to our code, as best that we can.
And then the second question had to do with urban growth boundary. So does this extend to that, or is it just the city of Philomath or Benton County involved in some way?
According to the urban fringe agreement, if there's development in the urban growth boundary, Philomath's going to be either consulted on that, or we're going to take the lead on that, depending on what type of development it's going to be. So our code would either be enforced or it's going to be reviewed, one or the other.
Thank you.
Any other councilor have questions? Well, we have a recommended. Oh,
Councilman Drive.
sorry, Councilor Andrade.
So we've talked about this before. I don't know if it was in a council meeting or if it was even in the Philomath Citizens Academy, but I know the word blight there's a legal definition for it, but I don't. Is that something that is in this section of code? I tried looking in the definitions and I didn't seem to find it. I feel like it would be important to have, because even though it is a legal definition, apparently, it has some negative connotations, social justice wise. And
So if I could, there's existing language in section, excuse me, 1855, 110 C6. But it's really worded in terms of minimizing flood areas that are caused by flooding. I think there are 3 references in the current ordinance. I don't think the new language has added or changed that in any place.
yeah, I just still think it would, like, if we're going to be changing the code anyway, that it might be important to include that in there.
Do you have a recommended motion on that? Or do you want to propose a change?
I don't have a recommended motion because I don't know what, like, word for word what the legal definition is, but I would like to see the definition in there, just so that it is more clear with regards to any sort of rebuilding, or, you know, if there are certain requirements for insurance, like you were saying, like if you're going to use that word, it would be helpful to know what it is.
What I'm aware of is a definition of blight in Oregon revised statutes for urban renewal, which I don't think
That's what I'm thinking of.
would cross over into this particular area. So I think instead you would just use a dictionary definition. I'm just not aware that it's I'm looking at my phone to see if I find some other thing there. I'm not. That's probably not a good way to do this. We can certainly take a look and see if there is a definition. We'll bring that back. Don't have one for you tonight.
Yeah, I would like that. Thank you.
So what, Councilor Andrade, you might consider making a request for a continuance.
Thank you. I would like to request a continuance.
Is that, Jim, is that correct? That's what we're.
Sure.
So we have a request for a continuance on that. And so does that just trigger us to postpone making any further discussion on this?
Well, it's a motion,
Okay.
so it requires a second, and it would require the body to say, yep, we'll continue this till the next meeting.
Got it.
Oh,
So,
but sorry, to clarify, like, I don't want that to preclude any further conversation from happening right now. I just think that it would be important information to have before we make a decision.
Is brought forward. Could that be addressed at the time an ordinance is brought forward?
Yeah, this is a recommendation, so I think procedurally, if you have some things that you want us to look at and you make a motion to that effect, the council agrees, we can just bring it back. I don't know that.
Councilor Andrade, does that sound okay? We can continue this conversation and then potentially address that. If council agrees, potentially address that when we start to create an ordinance.
That sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So I'd like to second the motion. I think there's a different definition of blight in this space, and it might be helpful that we know that Brownsfield version or Brownfield versions versus this. And here, this is a simple definition.
Okay, sounds like we have a plan and we can talk more about that, but let's continue the conversation. Well, we have a motion on the table. We have a second on the motion. So all in favor of addressing this topic as we edit the ordinance in the future? Is that, I'm sorry, Councilor Andrade, is that essentially what the motion that you were making is to continue?
So I guess I would like us to continue conversation and then whenever we come back to this conversation at a different meeting, that we have that information. I don't, it would be nice not to like have an actual ordinance prepared, only in the sense that I believe that if we were to have an ordinance prepared without that information, I personally believe that it's more difficult to get changes in. I mean, obviously it's not impossible, but I would rather wait for that.
And so I didn't actually hear a specific motion there, but is it okay if we just pause and continue the conversation and then address this all at the same time as we address other comments? I think we can address this as we develop the ordinance as we just discussed.
Again, I don't quite know what you mean by like, as we develop the ordinance, like as in our discussions right now, or like once there is a draft ordinance at a different meeting. What?
Chris?
Just to get us out of this circular motion we're in, maybe let's just clarify the motion to add a definition of the term blight. And let's take a vote on that. And then if the council wants to add a definition, we can bring that back to you. If the council doesn't want or doesn't feel like an additional definition of blight is needed, then we can proceed to other comments.
Councilor Andrade, does that?
I'd like to make a motion that we add a definition of blight to this code.
Thank you.
Point of order.
Yep.
As I understand it, there's a motion seconded by Councilor Bisco. What do we do with that?
So I was just going to ask.
So
It's the same motion.
I think that may have been the intent of the original motion and the second. So whether that motion is withdrawn and a new motion is there, or we're just doing a Gordian knot and cutting through that and getting back to the point, either way works.
Councilor Bisco, is your second on that? Good. Okay, so we have a motion made by Councilor Andrade and seconded by Councilor Bisco.
Could you restate that motion, please? And then will there be discussion?
The motion is to add a definition of blight to this section of the code.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, and so Councilor Andrade, do you need to speak further to that, or are you good?
Just to reiterate my point, there are social justice connotations with the word of blight, and I think it's something that we should be cautious of using without further discussion.
Thank you. Councilor Lowe?
So I would like us then to get back with Mitch at FEMA to find out what FEMA's position is on adding the definition of blight and what FEMA's position is on social justice issues as it relates to this. Then I can make a better decision. Thank you.
Any other discussion on this question? Seeing none, all in favor of adding a definition of blight to the Plymouth Municipal Code, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, please raise your hand and say nay.
Nay.
Nay, so motion carries 4-3. And so any further questions, concerns about the code as it is? See, now we have a recommended motion on page 4 of the staff report. I'll go ahead and I'll move that the city council adopt the findings as present or as amended in the staff report. Sorry, I move that the city council adopt the findings as presented in staff report for the proposed code amendments as amended, as presented in file number PC 22-05 and the amendments, and that the amendments be approved and that the city manager is directed to present to the city council with an adopted ordinance. So I made the motion, seconded by Councilor Causey. All in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
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 So are we not waiting for?
We'll bring that
We're gonna-
back to be part of an ordinance, and so whether you include the definition in the ordinance or not can be at the time that you adopt the ordinance.
And so the conversation about continuation doesn't apply to this motion that I just.
That's right. It's just gonna come back to us as an amended ordinance. All opposed, please raise your hand, say nay. Seeing none, motion carries unanimously. Excellent. Okay. Any participant not satisfied with this decision may appeal to the State Land Use Board of Appeals within 21 days of this decision. Okay. Next. Well, we have an invited presentation by Oregon Cascade West Council of Governments Executive Director, Ryan Vogt, just kidding. Ryan Vogt, who has an impossible to pronounce name. And so I just thought I'd provide that little bit.
Thank you, Mayor. Do you want me to?
Just join us at the table here.
Yeah, usually we just sit cross-legged right in the middle. No, please.
Go ahead for counselors get the worst view in the house for sure. Thank you, Mayor, city councilors, and city staff. My name is Ryan Vogt. One of these days, I guess if I run for election, that'll be the slogan. Vote for Vogt. It's gotta go. It's gotta rain, right? And I am the executive director for the Oregon Cascades West Council of Governments. I note that you all have in front of you a data set that we put together this year. Really, I don't intend to take up very much of your time tonight. I have a couple of things that I wanted to accomplish. The first thing I wanted to accomplish is I am a lifetime social worker. So the fact that we are now at a place where we can get back together and see people eye to eye and shake hands is a thrilling experience for me. I certainly will respect your right to keep distance from me if you don't wish to shake my hand, but I'm also happy to do so. And I have only been the director of the agency during COVID times. And so it has been an interesting adventure to try and get my feet under me and try to figure out what all we are doing. So that was point one, accomplished. I am here and thank you for having me. The second point that I wanted to accomplish is, as I moved into the role, I asked members of the board of directors and consumers and partners what they thought the agency was doing well and what they thought we could improve on. And one of the things that really struck me and resonates still today is that there are a number of people, including board members at the time, who didn't know the full construct of what it is that the Council of Governments does. Now, I won't embarrass anybody by asking, but more rhetorically, as you looked at the report, did you find something in there that was of interest to you that you didn't know was a fingerprint that we had on the community? As a voluntary governmental agency, regional councils of governments exist throughout Oregon and throughout the nation. Not all parts of Oregon are covered, thus part of the voluntary component of this. And since they voluntarily serve at the region's needs for whatever it is the region wants the organization to do, none of us look the same. So Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments to the north, they just do economic development and the small business lending program. Lane Council of Governments to the south, they do much of what we do. They also run a telecoms group. Rogue Valley does part of the seniors program, but not the entire program. But Rogue Valley also has a drone program. So everybody does different stuff based on the needs of the region. But what we did when we put this together, and I know it seems a little bit awkward to be in September talking about our annual report, but this is the first time our agency, to the best of my knowledge, has ever put together data to try and talk not just about the spectrum of services that we provide to the communities, but to also try and quantify that. So you got a better sense of what it is that we're doing. Now, that leads to the next logical question. Hey, Ryan, we're in Philomath, and what you gave me is a Benton County report. So how can you tell me what you're doing in our town? Well, this was our first cut at it. So the best we could do at this point in time when we did this was distill it down to the county level. We wanted to get some feedback about how is this going? Does this tell you something? Are you excited by it? Are you nervous by it? Are we doing the right things? And then my hope is that this year or the following year, we will do county reports that will also have an addendum so that you can see really what our footprint is in the Philomath. And then the last thing that I wanted to do tonight, aside from being available to answer questions, is talk to you a little bit about our actual footprint. One of the things that we do is we run the Veteran Services Program on behalf of Benton County. It's the only county out of the 3 that we are engaged in the Veteran Services Program. Philomath has a very active veterans community, and we serve a number of consumers in Philomath. We were also at the chili cook-off last night to make sure that we got the word out there about what it was that we were doing. I didn't hear who won, so I'm not exactly sure how that panned out for our veteran services group, but they were excited to be invited and to be there. We also provide Meals on Wheels to the Philomath community. It comes out of the Corvallis Meals on Wheels site, which you have 45 housebound consumers that regularly receive meals through that program. We also provide state health insurance benefits counseling. It's the SHIVA program, and that's in your manual there, but there are 18 consumers in the Philomath area this year that have received one-on-one counseling about what Medicare programs may be appropriate for them as they age into being eligible for Medicare. And then we are also involved with the Corvallis Area Metropolitan Planning Organization and a variety of other transportation projects going on throughout the 3-county region. And that includes, in the very near future, being involved with the start of the Philomath School Circulation Study. That is traffic pattern awareness about what happens as kids are going back and forth to school. So we'll be part of that study. And then finally, we have ad hoc services or cafeteria plan services that we provide for many of our member agencies. And that can be sometimes member agencies would like assistance with technology services or with land use planning or transportation planning, because a lot of smaller communities can't afford a full-time planner. And so we can sometimes offer that assistance. We have done some GIS or global information system mapping as well for some member governments. One of the things that we're working on right now is we've received a grant through Business Oregon, also matched by the Ford Family Foundation, of $84,000 for rural grant capacity. And this is specific to rural communities being able to access the infrastructure or IIJA funds. That those funds at the federal level are extremely complicated. They've created somewhere in the neighborhood of 120 some new funding streams to access outside of all of the existing funding streams that they bolstered. And so this partnership put some money on the table for us to try to bring a grant writer to the table to help communities figure out what to chase and what's exciting for them. And so that, you know, smaller communities, sometimes it's a roll of the dice to figure out, do we really want to pay the money up front for a grant writer? If we don't get the grant, then we're out the money. Plus, we have to know what our match is going to be and all of those things. So our hope is that we can offset the costs of that grant writing. Ann Whittington on our staff is touring around a number of the rural communities to get feedback around what might be something that we could apply for that has more regional significance as well. We also have an ask in front of the legislature right now for additional funding for the next 5 years that would pay for multiple staff members to do specifically just grant writing to access the infrastructure funds. So I will keep you posted on that. Mid-Willamette Valley to our north is leading that effort, but all of the councils of government in the state have signed on to it and are backing that effort to try and get additional grant writers for it. So the last thing I would say, this really is the last thing aside from questions, is each member agency has a member that serves on the board. Your Mayor Jones, is a very active member on our board. He also voluntarily has moved himself into the executive committee of the board, which means he's moved from one meeting every other month to monthly board meetings and finance committee and budget committee and quality time with me. So I think when he volunteered, he didn't know it was going to be an additional 7 or 8 meetings, but I'm super appreciative of your support and your efforts. And he's a strong advocate for your community at our table as well.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate the presentation. Do you have questions from council? Ryan?
Yes, I have a question. We're finding that some grants and some services are limited for rural communities with populations in excess of 5,000, which we recently surpassed. Are any of the services that you described limited above that 5,000 line?
So the services that we provide, no, but some of the grants that you're going to be seeing at the federal level will have still dividing lines. Where we can help, where we are hopeful that we can make an impact on that is that by regionalization, by applying for stuff that maybe impacts more than one community, we can start bumping ourselves into a larger category where there's actually bigger money. But those infrastructure funds, I wish I could say that it was a nice clean path for accessing those funds and everybody would know how to do it, or even like the first distribution of the ARPA funds where, you know, your city had a number and you just received it. I know that's kind of a soft way of saying it was much more complicated than that, but there was a formulaic way of everybody getting money, and as long as they spent it within a certain category. So as far as the grants go, we will chase grants that we can try and fit within the mold that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Vista.
Yes, thank you. I have a question. So the difference between grants and IIJA funding, are they the same thing in this context that you're sharing here?
In the context that I'm sharing, yeah, is that most of the infrastructure funding is administered in the as grants. There is some money coming directly to the state to administer, but the state is setting up a grant access system instead of a formula system. So, so yes, that's what I'm talking about.
And can you share what the timeline is on that? There's a sunset somewhere in this, somewhere down the road. I don't know if we actually know that yet on that IIJA funding. Is that still unknown?
It's all intertwined with the individual ones. So some deadlines have already passed. For instance, there were some grants that were out at the, I would say, the mega level, where they were trying to put together grant centers regionally throughout the nation that would actually then be a vehicle for administering the grants on a more local level. Some of those have already passed. Most of them, as they sit right now, the anticipated role would be annual recurrence for the next several years. So even if you miss a deadline now, the way that it's anticipated to be is that they would roll with your deadline.
Other questions? Councilor Nails.
Yes, you mentioned in your letter about a regional conversation you're having about housing solutions. Can you expand upon some of those, at least a little brief introduction about what are those, some of those conversations and how it relates to what we're facing as far as housing solutions?
Absolutely. So what I didn't share is my immediate employment before coming here was as the Chief Operating Officer for Oregon Housing and Community. So I bring a bit of a housing excitement to the role. But Council of Governments has never been a leader in this space, and I want to be very clear that we're not seeking to be. There are nonprofits and other organizations that are experts in doing housing. What we're actually very good at is trying to shake out solutions and bring people together. So we have been invited into conversations around workforce housing, around shelter housing, around leveraging funding differently, around whether or not economic development funds can be paired with other funds. But really, we are coming to the table as a participant, not as a leader in those places. There, at the national level, there are other councils of government who have been able to champion things like shelter housing or even single-family dwellings being built at the state penitentiary. And I know that we've got a lot of systems in place that maybe could support that type of an effort, but I didn't have a chance to talk to Colette before she moved to the federal level, and I don't think they've appointed a new director of corrections yet. So, so we've been in a lot of those conversations. We also are a very close partner with the Community Services Consortium, if you're familiar with their services. And they are commonly a vehicle for a lot of funding that comes from Oregon Housing and Community Services. And so through our partnership with them, we're also in a lot of these conversations. The beauty is we're in a lot of spaces as a additional thought partner. The problem, particularly with housing, is there is no one solution, right? The entire spectrum needs help from middle income, I think arguably even high income housing being freed up that allows other stuff to move, to affordable housing, which frequently has kind of a more negative connotation to it when people say it, but affordability is really about people being able to live in the community where they live and work, regardless of how high that income stuff is. And then, of course, there are all kinds of sheltering solutions that are needed for temporary and long-term.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then go ahead and go to Council Andrade, and we'll probably thank Mr. Vogt for coming out and joining us for the evening.
And I'll also stick around until after the meeting in case anybody has questions.
Thank you. Council Andrade.
Thank you. Thanks for being here and for that report. I was surprised not to see anything about the bias response initiative that councilors from Corvallis had brought to the COG, and I was hoping, I haven't heard much from the COG by ways of updates besides the fact that we had those focus groups recently in the 3 counties, and I was hoping that you could elaborate a bit more on how things have changed since the initial bringing forth of that idea from Corvallis.
Thank you so much, Counselor, and I apologize for not having touched on that during my overview. The reason why it's not in the report is because this was an annual report. The bias incident response system started in the early spring in terms of the board authorizing us moving forward with that. But you may all be aware that the city of Corvallis approached the Council of Governments with some seed money to see whether or not we would be willing to lead a conversation around a bias incident response system for the region, because Corvallis recognized that this is a bigger issue than just exists in the city of Corvallis. There was a lot of conversation about it and some finesse, but ultimately the board agreed that the COG could go forward with that. We let out a contract with Zillow International. They have done a lot of research on existing bias incident response systems. As the counselor just mentioned, they just wrapped up a series of community events where they did a lunch and a dinner in each county and invited people, fed people, which is always a great way to try and get some additional people there. And my understanding is that in most instances, the turnout was really very well attended, with the exception of East Lynn County. The event in Lebanon was very poorly attended. They've also gathered additional information outside of that. Those just wrapped up in the last couple of weeks. And so the contractor is now putting together that information and preparing for I believe there's another conversation coming up with elected officials and things of that nature in the coming months. And then there will be a recommendation of what their findings are. And I have no idea, the recommendation could be more education. It could be set up a formal bias incident response system. It could be sending people towards existing structures. I don't know. That's the way we contracted it, is what do people want and what would that look like? So thank you for bringing that up, Councilor. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I just know that it started out as one thing last year, and I wasn't quite sure how exactly it had changed since then. So thank you.
Yes, and Councilor Lowe.
Just an observation, in the report, there seems to be a good emphasis on senior and disability services,
Yes, sir.
community service programs, and the veterans that you mentioned. So to me, all of those are folks or groups that are special needs possibly, or at the margins, or economically disadvantaged, or essentially folks that need maybe more recognition or help than the others. And in this, we have a very strong commitment to inclusivity here. We have a committee that deals with that. And I'm just wondering if there's anything the COG could do to, especially for senior services. We don't have a lot of attention paid to those people in this community that maybe need services or have more inclusion within the community. So I'm wondering if there's anything COG could do to maybe work with the city to help us elevate our understanding of the people that are here, and maybe how we can better recognize them and include them.
So if I'm hearing you right, you're asking about whether or not the COG could play a role in assisting in diversity, equity, and inclusion work in the
Right.
community.
Exactly, yeah. And if there's a way to identify folks through the programs that might be helpful to the council, the community, to bring them into the conversation.
Yeah, that is really an excellent question, and I appreciate that observation about the community's needs there. One of the things that, to be completely candid with you, our agency is really at its own infancy in terms of moving through the diversity, equity, and inclusion education spectrum. It was an unmet need when I came on board, and it was one of the things that I made it a non-negotiable as I came on board, that we needed to start having that conversation in earnest. We are in the process right now of putting out for our organization and Community Services Consortium, which I mentioned earlier, putting out a joint RFP to try and bring somebody in to help us bring a framework and to do an organizational assessment to see where we are at. So the short answer is, we're not experts in that space, and I don't want to pretend to be. The longer answer is, we're going to ask them to bring trainings and things of that nature, and we will open the door. We'll open the door and we'll set the table. If our staff are having trainings and city staff or what have you also wish to come, if we've got the space and we're able to do it, we will. The hope would be that we could get to that place where we could also assist member governments with moving through that conversation. And my staff are excited about that. But by the same token, I don't want to pretend that that's we get trained and now we're ready, right? Well, my staff have plenty of journey they need to do before, including myself, before we're ready to think that we're in a place where we can assist them.
That's really heartening to hear, especially the emphasis of training, because that's been a big subject in our discussions, is DEI training for those of us in council, staff, and so on. So that's great if you guys are working in this, and I know the mayor's on the board, that that's very good to hear that that's kind of in the works. That would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. And again, I'm happy, I'll be here till the end. So if anybody has any other questions, I'm happy to field those.
Thank you very much. I
Thank you.
appreciate you being here. Excellent. So next, we're going to move into public comments, and I'm just going to mention that please do not be surprised if we take a break in the middle of public comments. I anticipate that it'll be a good time for a break somewhere in the middle. So heads up on that. I'm going to read a disclosure that we read out before every city council, every time we have public comments, just so that the public is aware of kind of the rules that we operate within. This time is intended for individuals to speak and for council to listen. Members of the council will not discuss topics or make decisions during this time, but may take comments or requests under advisement, assign topics to a future council or standing committee agenda, or request staff to take an action. Comments about a topic scheduled for a public hearing should be given during the public hearing, not during visitors and comments. Testimony time is limited to 3 minutes per speaker, and a 30-second warning will be provided. Speakers should provide their name and the city of residence. Providing council with a written copy of your comments prior to or during the meeting is always appreciated. Those who attend public meetings are required to adhere to the council's rules of proceedings and observe the same standards of decorum as members of the council. Further, at the discretion of the presiding officer, that's me, members of the public who fail to observe these rules of procedure will be asked to discontinue speaking and will not be allowed to speak again for the remainder of the meeting. And so with that, we have Peggy Yoder. You draw first.
Brought copies for you since I know you'd like to read as we speak. Let me give one to Ruth. Okay, great, thank you. I'm Peggy Yoder and live in the city of Philomath. At the May 21st, 2018 City Council meeting, Levi Miller and Lee Miller requested approval for multiple land use decisions to be made concurrently. Philomath City Manager Chris Workman presented an extensive staff report enthusiastically supporting this request. This oral report lasted 110 minutes. Community members wishing to give comments were given only a few minutes each. In 2021, the city manager, acting as our planning official, allowed homes to be built before survey pins were put into place. He made this decision without consulting our planner, Pat Deppa. I can say that because of the December 19, 2021 Planning Commission meeting, Mr. Deppa was asked how it happened that homes were built without the proper survey markers, and he responded that mistakes were made and that the city was trying to be accommodating. He added that he wasn't involved, saying, I never would have done that. It's so dangerous. It is my hope that the city council sincerely examines the concerns that have been brought up regarding the actions of the city manager and evaluate the authority that he has regarding planning related decisions. I also ask that the city council seriously consider appointing our city planner, Pat Deppa, as a planning official for Philomath. Please include this document as part of a permanent record in next month's council packet. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. Next, we have Ms. Maria Cole.
My name is Maria Cole, and I live in Philomath. Dear City of Philomath and City Council members, I'm here tonight on behalf of my neighbors because we need your help to resolve the property line issue, which affects 14 homes on South 16th Street. The property lines have been an ongoing situation since June 2021, when my family first moved to Philomath. We spent a lot of time searching for property markers before learning that they were not set. In October of 2021, a field crew surveyed our lots and set our property corners. A week later, I was told that there was an error with the property lines for around 12 homes, ours included. The homes were built too close to the property lines, resulting in setback issues. According to Philomath Municipal Code, the minimum distance between a home's side yard and property line is 5 feet. One side of my house is 3.8 feet from my north property line. Several homes are worse than mine, with one house having a 1.5 foot setback. We were told in order to correct the setbacks that our property lines would need to be adjusted. We were also told that NBC builders would cover all the related costs and that they would compensate homeowners at the rate of $27 per square foot lost due to net loss of land. Most homes are losing property in order for their neighbor's setback to be corrected. The average lot size is 5,320 square feet. 4 homes are losing over 119 square feet, with 1 home losing around 289 square feet. These property owners will need to be compensated anywhere from $3,000 to $7,000. As a group, the total compensation due will be over $20,000. During the July 25th City Council meeting, it was discussed that if NPC builders do not pay all the related fees, that the homeowners would then be financially responsible at the tune of $3,000 to $5,000 per household. There was no mention of who would compensate the property owners should that happen. It is not right or just to impose a financial burden on us for a building error we did not make, nor have the power to authorize. The survey had been completed prior to constructing our homes. All of this could have been avoided. The property line issue has caused a great deal of stress for my family and others. My surrounding neighbors and I have had to cancel our fence installation 3 times. Until we have new property corners so that we can build our fences, our yards are not safe enough for our kids to play in. We are asking you tonight to please consider alternative sources should the remaining fees not be paid, which includes a survey and the property owner's compensation. We are also asking for more leadership and involvement in the city so that these remaining items, including receipt of the new deeds, happen in a timely manner.
30 seconds.
We all want to see Mill Pond Crossing thrive and see our community reaches the full potential. I believe we can get there, but it starts by prioritizing the needs of our current residents. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cole. Appreciate it. Next, we have,
Excuse me, sorry, really quickly. It's a little difficult to hear. Thank you, Ruth. I appreciate you doing that.
Ms. Michelle Krantz.
My name is Michelle Krantz, and I am a resident of Philomath. My husband and I bought our home on South 16th Street in Mill Pond subdivision in October of 2021. In signing of the documents to close on this home, we were given a methane waiver to sign. It was very generic and benign. Nowhere in this document did it state or specify that this particular lot had high or dangerous levels of methane or any other dangerous chemicals or gases. Approximately a month after moving in, we were informed that our lot specifically had one of the highest methane readings in the subdivision. We had no idea how high, but it was high enough that PBS, the environmental testing company, started coming out a couple times a month. So high that we have a permanent methane testing monument about 10 to 12 inches in diameter, 10 to 15 feet from my back door. So high that we can't barbecue, we can't mow with a gas mower, or use a fire pit. Methane is highly flammable and therefore an explosive and fire hazard. The lower explosive limit is 5% by volume. Our readings on our home have been at 50%. We also have a plethora of contaminants in our soil that our entire neighborhood full of children plays in every single day. One of those chemicals is hydrogen sulfide. Speaking of testing, PBS has not been out since February. That's 8 months of zero testing because Levi Miller stopped paying them. 8 months of worrying about whether our levels have gotten worse or not. At one point, MPC workers came around and checked all of our methane fans in our homes. 2 weeks after this inspection, they contacted me to let me know that in my particular house, our methane fan was blowing back into my crawl space. That's highly concerning. We don't know the dangers of the levels of methane that are being led back into my home. We are also involved in the property line adjustment debacle, which due to the error of the builder, we have had a net loss of approximately 192 square feet of property. I am imploring you, the city council, our city manager, to halt construction until the issues are resolved, because between the methane mitigation and the property line adjustments, all we are asking for at the end of the day is just for everybody to do the right thing. That's all I have.
Thank you, Ms. Krantz. Appreciate you being here. Next, we have Michael Luzandi. Sorry.
Good evening, councilors, mayor. My name is Michael Lusardi. I'm a resident of Philomath. There's been a great deal of attention in recent months regarding the continuation of the Mill Pond Crossing development and the mixed feelings regarding both MPC Builders and its head developer, Levi Miller. However, very little scrutiny has been given to the City of Philomath's involvement in its interfaces with this development, specifically instances on non-compliance with municipal and state building code. Several discrepancies were found as a result of the survey completed amidst the sequential construction of houses on South 16th Street during phase 2 of the development. These discrepancies were identified and reported to the builder and to staff of the planning department. The planning official approved the issuance of several residential certificates of occupancy after these issues were made known to the planning department staff, 4 of which coincided with specific lots having property line discrepancies. These approvals were completed without proper identification of the known issues with lot line setbacks. Therefore, it is reasonable to conclude that in accordance with the City of Philomath's Municipal Code, Title 18, these 4 approved certificates of occupancy were possibly erroneous at time of issuance, since remediation of property line discrepancies was not properly documented on the condition of approval. Upon a later review of the building documentation for Mill Pond Crossing in early August, it was also discovered that 3 houses constructed in the development appeared to have not passed final home inspection, nor obtained certificates of occupancy for the structures. 2 of these houses were originally the property of Miller Plan LLC, transferred for no cost. And the third was originally purchased by one of the primary realtors who had advertised the development, although this house has been sold to another individual who still did not have a certificate of occupancy issued at time of this writing. Every one of these homes has or had residents occupying the structure, which is against Oregon Administrative Rule 918-480-0140, which states that a certificate of occupancy must be issued by a building official prior to occupancy of the dwelling. This matter was expediently brought to the attention of City Council via email with no response at large on the issue. In the past month, one of the 3 houses has had a finalized home inspection, certificate of occupancy issued, was sold. However, this was retroactive in nature as a family had already been occupying the residence for over a year. One would assume that these potential violations of code would be identified beforehand and dealt with by the city manager, who is responsible for the enforcement of the municipal code. However, as the individual serving as planning official also serves as city manager, this results in a conflict of interest. Instead of operating as 2 discretely separate entities from one another in a system of checks and balances, this permits the errors made by planning department to go unnoticed and unreported, undermining the city's adherence to its own code. Therefore, I implore the city council to take heed of the planning department's oversights made during the development of this Mill Pond Crossing, serving as the citizens' elected officials by ensuring that dwellings are constructed and certified to the letter of the law. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sorry. Next, we have Mr. Stan Alyrica.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, Mayor, councilors, and city staff. My name is Stan DeVick. That's okay. I have lived and worked in Oregon for over 45 years and retired to Benton County in April of this year. The reason I'm speaking, and by the way, it's probably been 10 years since I've done any public speaking. And so I apologize in advance for sounding awkward, and my comments are going to be rather personal. So again, it may be awkward. The reason I'm speaking tonight is to implore all of you to please understand and help expedite the PLA process, property line adjustment with Levi Miller and those associated with the MPC builders. On July 2021, my wife and I bought the MPC home located at 756 South 16th Street as a rental property to supplement our retirement. For background, I want to tell you that we have never lied, deceived, cheated, or stole anyone's personal property or real estate property. We worked hard. We kept our noses clean. We repaid any debts that we had as quickly as possible. We acted with honesty, integrity, fairness, and no matter if an entry-level worker, a manager of dozens of workers, or his landlords. I'm telling you this because this is how we conducted ourselves here in Philomath, the Philomath community, which we really love. Despite being treated poorly by a title company, a next door neighbor, and a local appliance business. Simply put, We want our lot line issue resolved so that we can build our fences and satisfy the promise we made to our tenants and keep our good reputation as landlords. We ask you, the city of Philomath, to please do the right thing and help us get this issue resolved once and for all. Thank you very much for letting me speak.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbons. Next, we have Mr. Robert Biscoe.
Hello, my name is Robert Biscoe. I am a resident of Philomath. Two parts to my speaking today. One is I'm going to read something that was written by some of the Mill Pond residents, or one of the Mill Pond residents that wanted to stay anonymous so that they wouldn't be judged. Hello, I live on South 16th Street in Mill Pond Development. Our backyard butts up to a drainage canal to the west of my property. I have concerns about my property sliding into this runoff area due to poor planning and execution of the development. My property has already started to slide towards the area from the rain this past winter. I would like to know if anything's going to be done to prevent this from happening. All I am asking is that if you can please consider some sort of retaining wall to prevent this from continuing. Thank you, Mill Pond, a Mill Pond resident. I want to, so all the people that talk to you tonight, I appreciate the fortitude and the bravery to go in front of our city council and mayor. One thing, as I'm looking over here, the city of Philomath, the mission is to promote ethical and responsive municipal government, which provides its citizenry with high quality municipal services in an efficient and cost-effective manner. Each one of you as a councilor or mayor or a city official, I challenge you to take that to heart. There are citizens, friends, people in this room. Philomath is growing, and I am blessed to be able to meet some of these new residents. There's families, husbands, wives, new kids, little kids running around. They're our neighbors. I please encourage all of you to listen to what they're hearing and to be able to act on what I believe is the foundation of this wonderful city, and to do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Biscoe. Appreciate it. Next, we have Mr. Peavy.
Hello, my name is Jeff Peavy. I live on North 11th Street there. Been here like a bunch of different times talking about this subject. But recently I reviewed the minutes from the June 27th, 2022 City Council meeting. And it was mentioned several times that the council believed that the residents of North 11th Street were not in favor of improving the street. Well, I beg to differ. I feel that most of the residents do want to improve the street. They just don't feel fair to have to pay the large assessments that were originally proposed or being forced into an LID against their will. As I said during my testimony on June 27th, I would support option 5, which would get the street improved, have the city park frontage and the subdivision improvement taken care of by the responsible parties, and giving the remaining residents 3 years to install the sidewalks. Let's get the long-awaited timeline on this. When are the 2016 conditions of approval going to be enforced? I've been I ride my bike every day down to Country Drive to Corvallis. I've watched all those rural properties along that way be developed. The infrastructure was always completed before I ever saw one single building go up. Paloma should have learned from our neighbors in Corvallis. Please consider our plea for justice concerning these issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Peavy. Appreciate it.
I beat the 30-second.
Practice makes perfect, right?
Mr. Jason Bushnell.
Hello, my name's Jason Bushnell, a resident of Philomath on 11th Street. Just wanted to say thank you for accepting public comments. I think it's great to let us do this. I've also been here several times, and it was months ago. I think it was the June meeting. It was just referred to. I felt that there was some promising traction that was made in that meeting in regards to 11th Street and the sidewalk issue and the discussions around Heather Glen and so forth. It was my understanding that the Heather Glen development would need to conduct the street improvements before construction continued in the neighborhood on Pippa Lane, which borders my home. I've continued to see the houses go up now. And the reason, I guess, for coming this evening is we're down to one house left. And so in my mind, once that last home is built, the leverage is gone, right? In my mind, the infrastructure should be done first. I haven't seen any movement yet on the street improvements or the sidewalk. Yet the construction has continued, and now one lot is left. So I just basically wanted to express that concern and request that the Heather Glen development is again reemphasized the need to do the street improvements, including the sidewalks, because I guess my worry is that once the homes are built, we'll just be back here again discussing the sidewalk issue again, which we already spent months and months and months discussing. So that's really the purpose of just raising the awareness and the request for reemphasizing that, because that is my concern, as well as I think other neighbors.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I do think it's worth just mentioning that the city council in the July 11th meeting gave them 1 year to finish the street improvements in the sidewalks as of July 11th.
That was in the July meeting.
Yeah. Okay. Kristen Knudsen.
My name is Kristen Knudsen. I'm a resident of Philomath. So our most recent experience with the city of Philomath was unfortunately fitting with what we have experienced in the past. Please note the dates as I continue, as they are important. We recently applied for permits to construct a duplex on our very last lot. Shortly thereafter, on July 26, 2022, the city's Public Works Department issued approval with the conditions that a water sewer main line be available and a non-remonstrance agreement be identified by the city manager. The decision was signed by Kevin Fear and sent by the City of Philomath Building Department to Mark Knudsen at 9:23 a.m. on July 27th, 2022. Mark asked the city's non-remonstrance agreement promptly on the very same day. On August 4th, 2022, the City Building Department sought to modify its decision post-approval by substituting a new condition. Under the city's provisions, the development became final, or the approval became final at 9:23 a.m. on July 27th, 2022. The city's code does not allow the city staff to modify the conditions of the final and the effective development review approval. I'm summarizing the letter our lawyer wrote on August 9th, 2022 to the city attorney, James Brewer. For more specifics on the specific city codes, please see the letter included in the city council packet for this meeting. After decades of the city implementing non-remonstrance agreements, and after we have signed non-remonstrance agreements for 6 years as a condition of approval, suddenly there is an attempt to reverse this approval. As noted, this violated their own city codes. It was once again necessary for us to have our lawyer write a letter to point this out. We did not want to, but we were prepared to seek review by the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals. This experience is just one example in a multi-year history of what feels like retaliation for speaking out and pressing in on the city's codes and Oregon law. By the way, this last incident of the city reversing their decision came on a day that we were dropping our newly married daughter and her husband at the airport and saying goodbye. The personal stress and toll are not acceptable. The city's lawyer responded to our lawyer's letter with a note stating the city agrees that it was an error to modify the city's decision. I can confirm that the modification of August 4th, 2022 is withdrawn. The city manager will forward the appropriate non-remonstrance agreement. The action I am requesting today is an update on what is happening with Heather Glen and the city park on 11th Street. Other projects have been moving forward. Has anything been ordered as far as supplies as of yet? What is happening with the plans moving forward? I understand they have a year to complete this. However,
Thank you, Ms. Knudsen, appreciate it. And now we have Ms. Frances Caldwell.
My name is Frances Caldwell, and I live on North 11th Street, and my comments have to do with the road improvement and sidewalk building on that street. Truthfully, I had trouble trying to figure out how to make my comment because I'm lacking information. I don't really know what's going on, and that's the main problem. But I did jot down a few things that came to mind. First of all, I am grateful that my son and I no longer have to pay well over $52,000 to have the sidewalk and road improved in front of our house. Thank you, counselors, for doing your job and relieving us of that burden. Jeff Peavy across the street, the fellow who just spoke to you, tells me that he was asked to remove a tree in front of his house to make room for a sidewalk, which has never appeared. Several sources tell me that Heather Glen, the development project across the street, now finishing the last of 5 or 6 houses, was never required to provide part of the funding for North 11th Street improvement as designated in its approval to build contract. Some of us, at least me, fear that the developers will be gone after they've sold all the lots and built all the houses and before they are held to that promise. And I worry that we property owners on North 11th Street will again be hit up for funding for that project. Truthfully, I do not really know what's going on, and I hear different things from different people. I just hope that a report will bring us up to date, and I'd like to see it in writing that what is going to happen with the improvement and who is going to pay for it, and will Heather Glen be held responsible for what it was promised to pay for. So that's it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Caldwell. Appreciate you being here tonight. Next, we have Mr. Mark Knudsen.
Mark Knudsen, Philomath. My main purpose in speaking tonight is to get to ask for an update on the street improvements in front of Heather Glen and the street and the city park on 11th Street. It was the city manager's job to get the contractual and financial guarantees for any deferred infrastructure work from Heather Glen before starting construction. He was required by the conditions of approval to sign an affidavit stating that he had done so. He received multiple reminders in the emails we have seen to complete that important work. I believe our lives on 11th Street, as well as in other cases, would be better off if these things were completed up front before construction start. Before I built one of my triplexes, I had to demolish a house that had asbestos. I had to provide documentation that I had remediated the asbestos and dispose of it properly before I was issued building permits by the city. It is good that they required it beforehand, because imagine if they had let me start building with the environmental hazard of asbestos floating in the air. Mr. Workman, please provide us with an update, hopefully tonight, to these 4 questions. What steps have been taken in the last 7 months since the January 24th City Council meeting to rectify the situation and get started on 11th Street construction in front of Heather Glen and the City Park? Approximately when do you expect construction to start? Approximately when do you expect construction to be concluded? And since it was the city manager's job to provide the contractual and financial guarantees that the 11th Street would be improved before releasing permits, how can he provide that guarantee now that the subdivision is mostly complete? Also, I recently applied for permits to build a duplex on one of my properties on 11th Street. Philomath has allowed for non-remonstrance agreements in lieu of street improvement for individual properties for decades. We have done it for the last 6 years. Suddenly, after we submitted for permits and received an approval from the city violated its own municipal code and reversed itself. Because there is such a lack of trust at this point, we felt we had to contact our attorney to defend ourselves. Our attorney sent a letter to the city attorney stating the code violation with a request to have the decision withdrawn. We went on to state that we are prepared to seek review by the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals if the August 4th update was not withdrawn. The city attorney responded by saying, I have reviewed your letter with the city manager and the city agrees and it was an error to modify the city's decision. I can confirm that this modification is withdrawn. Because we have a history of speaking out and seeing increasing assessment options proposed against us that were inequitable for us and not lawful because of it. When I consider that history and this recent attempt to change policy after we submitted for permits, it is hard for me to not see it as retaliatory. It is frustrating for us and embarrassing for the city.
Thank you, Mr. Knudsen, appreciate it.
Thank you for letting me speak.
That's all we have signed up for tonight's public comments. Thank you all. Really appreciate your feedback, your comments. Appreciate you participating in your local governance. Next, we have on the consent, we have a consent agenda. And look for a motion to approve consent agenda or modify. Councilor Andrade.
I would like to remove the August 8th City Council meeting minutes from the consent agenda. Would you like me to make a motion to amend them currently?
If you'd like, if you have minor amendments, we can make those. If you have major amendments, why don't we just pull it?
It is a minor amendment, and if anyone wants to see the wording, I sent it, unfortunately, just as the meeting started. Let's see. It is. Okay. I would like to make a motion to amend the August 8th, 2022 City Council meeting minutes so that line 39 of page 4 reads, identifying potential causes of attrition in meeting attendance. And to clarify, page 4 is labeled page 59 in our meeting packet.
I'm sorry, could you give the line number again, please?
Yes, line 39.
Thank you.
And could you repeat that one more time, how you'd like that to be modified?
Yes. Identifying potential causes of attrition in meeting attendance.
Okay. So we have a motion to amend. And we have a made by Councilor Andrade and seconded by Councilor Bisco. Would you like to speak, Councilor Andrade?
Yeah, when I had made my my report as on the inclusivity committee, I explicitly was trying to get at the fact that we're declining in attendance in our meetings, and it could be for a number of reasons, and some of those might include things that the council has done, but it was not intended to say that the council is the reason for causing this to happen. And if anyone would like additional clarification, I'm happy to provide that.
Thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. Any further comments or questions for Council Andrade on this? Councilor Lowe?
I guess I'm just wondering what because these are the action minutes, I'm wondering what the more detailed transcript and so on that we had actually says.
I don't know, because I have found that often it is not very reliable, as we have seen in the Planning Commission's request to use video as to keep those forever, because they're not the most reliable.
Well, I get, yeah, I mean, I guess.
I can tell you that that was what it was, and that I did not mean to say.
You're interrupting,
Yes.
Councilor Lowe. Sorry, you're interrupting.
I was just answering his question.
Sorry, you're interrupting him. He's talking.
Okay, it's difficult to hear sometimes.
I understand. It's complicated. Go ahead, Councilor Lowe.
I would prefer to look at that myself to verify.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Councilor Bisco.
So I just support this motion because I think it's important that, especially in this case, Councilor Andrade is our inclusivity co-chair. She was presenting to the council, and if this is a clarification point that she feels important, that we capture it in the minutes. Also nodding to the fact that the Planning Commission is proposing that we hold those videos as permanent record, because we're seeing a change in the comprehensiveness of our minutes, but also to Councilor Lowe's request, is there a mechanism of which we can table a motion, come back with the information or that opportunity to review that? I'm sorry?
Just make a motion.
Make a motion to table the motion
Take a
until
mo-
our next,
You can table it until the
so
next
we
meeting.
have a motion on the table right now.
And you can interrupt it to table. It's a privileged motion.
Okay, so then I would propose that we table this motion, recognizing Councilor Andrade's request, but also Councilor Lowe's request to review the portion of the minutes you need to review, so we can come back and conclude this.
And I'll second that.
Okay, and so we have a motion to table that was made by Councilor Bisco and seconded by Councilor Nielsen. All in favor of tabling the motion, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much.
Could I just ask a clarifying question?
I think that we just
I'm
tabled
gonna
it.
raise my hand and ask a different question.
And so we're still discussing, because we haven't actually tabled the minutes. We just tabled that motion. That's okay. So Councilor Bisco.
So my question is, do we need to clarify that that comes back at the next meeting? Does that need to be a separate motion?
So that would be if you want to table these minutes until the next meeting, that would be a specific motion you can make.
Okay, so that I move that we table these particular minutes until our next non-executive meeting.
Typically, we have minutes on your first meeting of the month. I try to just keep them on that agenda.
And so with this tabling, would they come back then? That's the clarification, is when
To the first
August
August meeting.
I'll second.
October.
So we have table by Councilor Bisco, or I'm sorry, we have a motion made by Councilor Bisco to table these minutes until our October meeting, and seconded by Councilor Lowe. All in favor, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you much. With that, we have the consent agenda. Looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
So we have a motion made by Councilor Lehman and seconded by Councilor Causey. All in favor of passing the consent agenda, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. With that, we have new business, and we're going to have a conversation about records retention of audio and video recordings. Chris, would you like to provide a staff report on that?
Can. So this is coming from a request from the Planning Commission. At the last meeting, Planning Commission voted to request the City Council consider retaining records of their meetings, the audio and video recording indefinitely or in perpetuity. Several reasons. I tried to capture the bullet points that were provided in the minutes of that meeting. laid out difficulty in following the closed caption, inaccuracies in the closed captioning. The recording is helpful when reviewing the minutes. Action meeting minutes are truncated. Discussion about the value of keeping the recordings for a longer retention period. Comments about the state retention schedule requirements and uniformity, and then costs and potential costs of maintaining recordings long-term. Provide a little bit of input on why, the kind of purpose of the retention schedules. All this is coming right out of the Secretary of State's office, who sets these parameters for retention schedules, updates the manual. I don't know how often, I don't think it's annually, but periodically updates the manual as things need to be updated. And as a practice, currently, the city adheres to those minimum retention schedules for audio, video, print material. There are some minimums that we're required to do. And, for the most part, there's a balance between public benefit. There's always a cost that's associated with it, whether it be the actual keeping and or recording and or converting or whatever that process might be to get it into a permanent state. And then there's also the cost on the backside of retrieving that at any given time. So there's a cost there. And then the benefit obviously is having that available to the public. And so we look at how often are documents requested of city staff. Do we have records requests? And we're having to reply back that those documents don't exist anymore. They've been destroyed. And so, taking all that into account, really, the council's kind of got some decisions, I guess, to weigh out. One of the points I make is you'd have to come up with a pretty good justification, in my view, if you're going to retain only the planning commission's minutes, the audio and the video recordings, and not the others. I don't know that you could argue very successfully that those meetings are any more important than city council or any of the other committees or commissions or boards. And so I think the real request, although it was focused from the planning commission on retaining their audio and video recordings, would be really all public meetings that the city's holding, that all of those would be retained indefinitely. Again, from a staffing level, I just don't think it's necessary. We don't get a lot of requests for that. Currently, all the audio and video are put on the city's YouTube page. They're up there for a minimum of 1 year. Typically, it's going to be longer than a year because we're going to wait for that full year retention to go over into the next year before we're going to remove any videos. So you're talking, really more a year plus that the public has access to those. And beyond that, I would just argue I don't see a lot of value compared to the amount of staff time it's going to take like tonight's meeting, for example. We'll call it a 3-hour meeting. Tomorrow, in order to download this video and transfer it over to some type of a external hard drive or somewhat, it's just going to take that much more time. Depending on how fast your processor is. I'm not an IT specialist, but I think your minimum, you're talking 15-20 minutes, get that converted. And if you're doing that for multiple meetings during the week, throughout the month, throughout the year, there is a cost there in doing this. The flip side I talked about on the requests, again, we're just not getting requests for audio video recordings that are more than that year and a half old. For the most part, people are going online, they're getting it from YouTube, they're viewing it, because typically they're looking at things that are relevant within the last year and a half, 2 years at most. Anything beyond that, the minutes seem to be sufficing. And we go back on the city's website, the city recorded a little bit, we go back, I think, keep 3 years of how many years worth of written minutes do we maintain on the city's website without having to do an actual records
Off the
request?
top of my head, we're back to 2016.
2016. So again, that's a written format. It's already there. It's already scanned in. So we provide, that's 6 years back of written minutes available on the website without having to really use any staff time to retrieve those documents if that's what's needed. So my recommendation coming from an administrative standpoint is to adhere to the Secretary of State's retention schedule. I'm open to recommendations, different than that and talking through that. But again, I think we'd want to be consistent between our different boards, committees, commissions, and Don't worry, late, but happy to answer any questions on that and get some direction from the council.
Thank you. Counselor Cosmo.
Yeah, I brought this issue forward. It was raised in the planning commission. Commissioner Yoder raised the question. And looking back at how our systems worked in the past, we had very extensive minutes, which were sometimes discussed at length as well. And over time, considering the last 5 to 10 years, I believe our meetings have become much more complex, much more involved, and much more lengthy. And as a result, the minutes have been longer and more involved. So the move to our action minutes is much more efficient. However, we do lose that comprehensive record that we have in full minutes. And while our audio recordings are online, you can always go back to those and get the full flavor of the conversation. I don't find the closed captioning to be particularly helpful, primarily because it doesn't identify who's speaking. So unless the individual is addressed by name, you can't tell who said what. And of course, words are often misspelled. So I recognize that we have an imperfect system. I don't believe it's technically possible to retain audio video records indefinitely with certainty. And I'm not sure I would want to try that. I would advocate for retaining them for a period of 2 to 5 years for all meetings. And I would also like to ask for Council Brewer's input on adhering to the state guidelines and any concern he might have about deviations from those guidelines.
Excuse me. You're required, the state archivist rules are administrative rules. They have the force of law. Cities have a particular set of rules. It's based on the content of the record, and we're simply required to comply with those. In terms of the public meetings law and the record for that, you have choices, which are you can have minutes, or you can, if you don't take minutes, you can have an audio video recording. But the schedule is the same. It doesn't, it pays less attention to the format than the medium than it does to message, I think.
And so do we have a specific motion that you were proposing?
Yes, I'll move that we retain the audio recordings for a period of 5 years.
That's audio and video, correct? Audio and video, or just audio? I just need to clarify. Sorry. Didn't interrupt.
Are they combined or are they separate? Are they? Some meetings have video and some meetings list audio.
They do.
When we were doing it through Zoom, we could separate the two out. Currently, when we transfer it over to action minutes and having the recordings go on YouTube, YouTube has them combined and does the transcript. So that was the time savings, was putting it on YouTube rather than on Zoom and having it available in that format. So the audio video is combined. There's probably software out there somewhere where you could run it through and splice off just the audio, but that would be an extra step.
No, I don't think that's necessary.
I'm going to interject and I'm going to correct just a little bit on that. As long as we save the recording of a Zoom meeting to the laptop and not the cloud, it will create a separate audio recording. That is not as difficult to save. If we don't have that, it is extremely cumbersome to separate audio from video via YouTube, because you have to download it to a program and then separate it as an audio, and that takes hours for a 3-hour meeting to do. I've had to do it. So
But the Zoom audio, we could,
the Zoom
we'd just be
audio
doing both.
can be, yes,
Thank you.
and is substantially a smaller file than the video.
Thank you. Councilor Lowe?
Just, could I ask, city recorder a clarifying question? So if it were downloaded to a hard drive, how much work does that put on you or whoever's doing that? Does it add appreciably to your duties, or what kind of effect it's?
To just deal with the audio recording would not add substantially. It's the videos that become time consuming. The videos are time consuming to deal with if you try to retain them. And you also have to remember that in addition to what Mr. Brewer said about the differentiation or lack thereof between minutes and keeping recordings, if you keep recordings for a long term, you also have to maintain the ability to migrate them to whatever the new technology is. Anybody remember the discs this size? This size? The state has recordings that are like that, and they literally have to maintain an ability to play those, because that's the way it was kept. So that's the reason paper is really preferred.
Thank you very much. Councilor Visco?
Thank you. So I do support this motion, and in part those reasons is they've been a couple factors. We're really not getting the complexity of our meetings and the context of them with our current action minutes. I find that I've been in the meeting and I look at some of those gaps and you just feel like it's not all there. I think just a public transparency that it will serve us well to capture this in our video and or audio formats. I'm also open to the idea that we explore other options. So at least this will give us that opportunity to establish a better record currently. If we want to look at other options, we can do so. I also want to nod to the fact that we often have planning commission recommendations coming before us. In this case, this was a motion that came from the planning commission, and the recommendation is to move forward with a different, so let me see what it says. Planning commission passed the following motion, that a request be made to city council that recorded planning commission meetings be kept indefinitely along with the action minutes. I think we are recognizing that the planning commission has made this recommendation, so it's been through that body as well. We're acknowledging their authority in that space, and this would at least give us a nice in between where we adapt to perhaps an improved form of minute records. I'll also note that 1 year isn't necessarily a particularly long time. I know that the local improvement district discussions, they have been going on for 15 plus months. I also know that we are now looking at Mill Pond Crossing and having an adequate record to go back and evaluate the circumstances we're hearing about the city. If we had the minutes that we are working with today, would make that much more difficult to go back and look at what issues are we talking about and what decisions were actually made in discussions were made, public testimony, etc. So I do support this motion based on those recommendations from the planning commission, and also the need of perhaps having some more complex and more detailed minutes, as well as a longer retention schedule of those types of minutes.
Thank you. Councilor Lowe?
Yeah, I was sort of thinking initially about, what's the matter with 1 year, but as Councilor Visco said, I think there is value. I mean, I think reflecting that, I think it probably would be good. I guess my question is audio sufficient, or do we need video also? I mean, if it makes the city recorder's job easier just with audio, and we have a system of cataloging it so we can get to that right year and month and so on, I think that's good.
Yeah. Councilor Kazi?
Yes, I just wanted to, I very much support the action minutes because the way they're structured, it will enable you to refer to exactly the point in the audio where you need to go, whereas in the past, you had to listen to about 2 hours before you remembered, before you got to the point you needed to get to. So I think that the action minutes and the audio together, I'm not sure how much the video really adds. But anyway, I would support the audio for 5 years and the action minutes as they're currently produced.
Thank you. Councilor Andrade, I saw you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Beautifully said in support of this motion. I too support it for those reasons, as well as accessibility issues. Sometimes people need to have those the written stuff read to them, and if we don't have access to that audio, it is very incoherent. At some point in time, there were words that just I had no idea what we were even talking about at the time when I take a look at it. So very in support of it. And then also, just sometimes the minutes aren't enough. For instance, when earlier when we were talking about how Heather Glenn had a year to put in the sidewalks, I quickly tried to search through the July meetings and couldn't find any mention of Heather Glenn in there. And I don't know if that's like a mistake on my part or if somehow it just got missed, because mistakes happen. So yes, very in favor of this motion.
Thank you. And can you just read the motion to me that was made previously?
The motion, as I had it, was to retain audio recordings for all meetings for 5 years. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that is correct.
Thank you. And I saw Councilor Lowe, you had your hand up.
Just to answer the question.
Thank you. So seeing no further questions, all in favor of passing the motion as stated, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much for that. Let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break. And we'll come back at 8:55. Thank you. Council Lowe. Council Lowe, Council Bisco. All right, so next on the agenda is the social services funding allocation. And I'm assuming that Council Lowe, you're gonna talk to that?
I would love to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. All righty. So just for the benefit of the audience and reminder to ourselves, the city does, in the community spirit and recognizing we can't provide services to all people, has been able to make some state money that we receive. We take 35% of state revenues, and the city council historically has allocated 35% of that to social service agencies, 501c3s, and other units. The COG is a good example. We heard about Meals on Wheels. Meals on Wheels is one of those entities that applied for some money from us. So the emphasis is on service to Paloma citizens, and it's we provide essentially monies for folks that are in need and deserve it. So and we have, so this year we had $36,811 that was available for social service requests. We went through advertising, solicitation of applications for this, and provided enough time. And we have the following entities that applied. So we had the ABC House, and their funding request this year is for $5,000. We had Maxtivity, their request was $1,200. Meals on Wheels, the COG related entity, $1,500. Paloma Community Services request $88,750. PYC $8,000, and Strengthening Rural Families $4,500. These are all entities that we've historically given awarded money to. Of note, there are two new ones that I want to mention specifically. And one that I think those of us in the committee, which consists of the mayor and Councilor Causey, we're very glad to hear from, and they're called the Dementia Warriors. And it's a group that is very much a grassroots group. But there's recognition that there are people in this community that are suffering from dementia. And many of them are senior citizens, many of those folks that are not really serviced or given service by other organizations. The city can't provide that. And there was a very personal poignant story that went along with this. And if anybody's interested, you can certainly listen to or look at the video recording. But they also will provide services for people that have premature dementia before they become senior citizens. So we were very, very impressed as a committee about this. The Dementia Warriors requested $1,500, and through our discussions, we actually are recommending $2,000, a $500 increase of what they wanted. They said they would appreciate that. They really didn't want or need money beyond the $2,000, but they were very hard to that. And I think we'll see some really positive things for those folks that are suffering from dementia. So now the other one that I really want to highlight is unique. It's Benton Habitat for Humanity. So they're sort of the outlier in this case. They were requesting $28,207. So remember, we had $36,811 to kind of divvy up. Now we work with Benton Habitat for Humanity. A lot of it has to do, well, all of it has to do with providing housing for folks that aren't able really to qualify for housing. But their basis for this amount was essentially wanting to to have a certain amount of SDC fees that they have to pay the city, essentially wanted to have that paid back through this donation. And we just, there were a number of issues there, including equity, fairness to anybody else that comes to us and has to pay SDCs. And then we were to like refund that in a different form than how they pay. It just wasn't equitable. And they understand that. So when the city came to making its recommendation for the full 36,811, we recommend, this is for the council to vote on, certainly, this is our recommendation. So it was to award the amounts that I mentioned to those various agencies, $2,000 rather than $1,500 to Venture Warriors. And essentially the difference then that we would like to give to Benton Habitat, we recommend is $5,861. So within the agenda packet, you have the breakdown so you can see what the dollar amounts are. So that equals 36,811. So this is one element of our giving through those shared revenues. We do have another program that I want to mention because we'll be voting on both of these. This is where we provide an allocation of some water and sewer revenue money to help those folks that have difficulty in paying their utility bills for whatever reason. And there are two agencies that are really good about providing short-term care for folks. Vina Moses and We Care. Vina Moses requested $5,000 and We Care requested $4,000 for a total of $9,000. The actual allocation of revenue that we could allow is $10,000, but when the committee discussed this, the consensus was, we would recommend the amount the agencies requested, not necessarily advance more. And I think the understanding is that difference of $1,000 then just kind of goes back into the reserve for the following year. So in a nutshell, we're looking at council awarding the 36,811 from shared revenues on the breakdown that you have in your packet. And then we're recommending for the water and sewer allocation, 9,000 as shown in the packet too. And happy to take questions, or if one of my fellow committee members would like to say something, that's great.
I just wanted to, do we have any potential conflicts of interest that need to be disclosed?
Sure. Yeah, I do. It's not a conflict of interest, but I think, thank you for reminding me, just a point of information. I am the president of Paloma Community Services. I did not take part in the discussion or the advocating for what they're wanting. It's the formula that the committee used is except for Benton Habitat for Humanity and Adventure Warriors I mentioned, it's essentially granting the same amount to each of those that requested it. And my son-in-law is Eddie Van Black, who runs PYAC. But again, same type of thing, but it's not a conflict of interest.
My wife works for Strengthening Rural Families, so I'll be recusing myself from this vote.
And then I am on the board of directors for the COG, which manages Meals on Wheels. But that is not, so that's just a potential conflict of interest. That is not an actual conflict of interest, and I will be voting.
Councilor Brewer, could you just remind everyone what a conflict of interest would be, why we're saying it's not?
So categorically, the state makes assumptions that elected officials are also likely to be on non-paid volunteer boards for charitable organizations. So those are simply removed as conflicts of interest because you don't actually get any financial gain or loss to yourself personally. An actual conflict of interest is when you do in fact have an actual gain or possible loss based on a decision. And a potential one is where you could have a personal gain or a personal loss.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So with that, we have a recommended motion. Chris?
Councilor Lowe, could I just clarify, I just want to make sure that we're clear. So Eddie Van Black's your son-in-law, I believe, is that fit the definition of a family member? I believe you have an actual conflict there, unless I'm
I think that is,
correct.
I think
So
that is correct.
I think, Pass, I think you do need to recuse yourself, similar to Councilor Lehman. So,
Councilor Causey?
I move that the council approve the funding allocation as suggested by the Finance and Administration Committee.
I'll second that.
Motion made by Councilor Causey and seconded by Councilor Nielsen. Would you like to speak to that, or?
No, I think that Council Rose and an excellent job of outlining our thinking.
Do have a point of order. So recusing myself from the entire vote, is that what I'm saying? Okay.
you need to recuse yourself. Well, if you split the two out, then you just recuse yourself from the social service funding, because that's support that's allocated between the social service providers. But you could vote, if you wanted to separate the vote for the utilities, you could separate that out and you could vote for that.
Okay.
And I think Councilor Lehman could also vote for that second one. So there may be some benefit in separating it out to allow the council members to vote.
Do you want to modify the motion?
Certainly, I will modify it to separate it into two portions.
Technically, it's on the table for the council to decide. So what's the process for modifying the, we have to make a motion?
So we can withdraw the motion, second degrees, and then make a new motion. So that's probably the biggest thing.
I will withdraw the original motion and propose a second motion.
Let's get an agreement from the second.
All right.
Thank you. All right, I move that the council adopt the state shared revenues allocation as proposed by the Finance and Administration Committee.
Thank you.
And I'll second that.
So the council, we have a motion on the table made by Councilor Causey, seconded by Councilor Nielsen. Any further questions or comments? Councilor Bishop.
Yes, so I always appreciate when the city can support these, any of our nonprofits that help support community members. I also have 12 years of experience in nonprofits, so I know how important this funding is for those nonprofit agencies. I do believe that last year I had expressed the concern about how we do this social services funding decision-making. And I would like to just reinforce that, which in part is, as a counselor who's not on the Finance and Admin Committee, we did not have the same opportunity necessarily to interview and engage with and ask questions. And also I had proposed in writing last year that we look at the makeups of our board, but also get some reporting back to the city on what actually we are getting for the dollars that we're spending. Not as in getting, but we'd like to know what good is coming from these dollars specifically. And I see that that has not yet occurred again this year. With that in mind, I would like that to be brought up for consideration before we do this funding request process next year. But I would also like to point to Corvallis, who has eliminated subcommittees, so finance and admin type committees, public work committees, and what that allows for is they added work sessions as a result of that, got rid of the extra subcommittees. And it allowed for, in this case, all 7 of the council body to engage in this process, whereas 4 of us were not part of this process. And I think it just goes to the point that it seems like this is a decision that should be made by the full council, not a recommendation by a certain group. So I'd like us to encourage that we evaluate before we get to our next year of funding, that we talk about that process, not being allowed to be on that finance committee, even though having requested that opportunity has left me feeling like I am not a part of directly supporting these community members. So I do support this, and I will be supporting the motion to approve this, but I think there are places we can do better on how we evaluate board, how we evaluate what these social services dollars go to, or at least get some reporting, and also being more inclusive of the whole council as a body.
Thank you. And Councilor Andrade.
Thank you, Councilor Visco. That perfectly sums up how I feel as well. I know last year it was difficult to understand why certain agencies were not given the same, were not given the amount of funding that they had requested. And thankfully, we've had some oral explanation of that now. However, it would have been nice to see some additional information as to, like you said, the accountability portion of it. We did adjust our policy. We did amend our policy earlier this year. The Inclusivity Committee reviewed it and made suggestions, and the Finance and Admin Committee did as well. And it would have been great to be able to see how that has perhaps made a more equitable funding allocation to the agencies requesting. And the other thing was, and it just points to the lack of information points to a larger issue of we don't really see minutes of committee meetings anymore. So I really love that suggestion, Councilor Bisco, of being able to have certain larger conversations as a council, as opposed to kind of having them in smaller groups and having the rest of us perhaps not as feeling as if we're not supporting those other agencies to the best of our abilities. And just one additional thing, just to clarify something that Councilor Lowe had said about equitable and the SDCs. So equity has to do with being able to help lift those who are disadvantaged to a space where you know, they're on par with the rest of society. So by allowing for Benton Habitat for Humanity to waive SDCs and not, you know, someone else who has housing that they're creating that isn't necessarily affordable, like that is equitable. Like being able to like allow that for them, and then for people who are building housing that is not that which Benton Habitat is building, then they would be paying their fair share. That's something, it's a bigger conversation, but I just wanted to clarify that for right now.
Thank you, Councilor Lowe.
I'm glad the Councilor Bispo, you brought up the recommendations that you had mentioned last year, because I remembered them. And we actually did have a discussion about that in the committee, taking those thoughts into account. And just to, so the application itself, the different criteria we're looking at. So along with the requested funding amount, a statement about purpose of the organization, the purpose of the funds, how that request meets the identified city priorities in the city of Wilmot, folks that we're trying to take care of. Here's the description of efforts made by the organization to ensure that the board membership of that organization represents the interests and experiences of people served. So in that area, we're looking at the DEI basically, or wanting, but we're not necessarily wanting to sort of lead the witness. We wanted them to explain in their own words what they were doing. So that would be looked at. So we did try to honor what was requested and still stay within the, I guess, a manageable way of doing things. I do take Councilor Bisco's point though about the larger issue of where you're going to do this, but as a committee, this is how we proceed.
Thank you. So, Councilor Andrade?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 9:15, so that right now.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to say also, it would be nice if we could have certain information found more easily on the website. I know I just Googled right now because I was like, I can't remember what our specific amendments were to the policy, because I know that we had a lot, and I tried Googling it, couldn't find it. I tried searching the city's website, I couldn't find it. So just wanted to put in a plug for having it more readily available, only because I was able to find a link to it, but the link was broken. And that was for calling, it was the call for submissions for funding.
Thank you. So with that, we have a motion on the table. All in favor of passing the motion as stated, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. All opposed, please raise your hand and say nay. 2 abstain. I'm like, what's wrong with you?
Don't ask.
All right, so motion carries unanimously with 2 abstentions. Thank you very much for that. Next, we're going to discuss the, oh, I lost my page, the back page on the water and sewer revenue allocation. We have a Councilor Causey.
I move that the council adopt the water and sewer revenue allocations as stated.
Thank you. So we have a motion made by Councilor Causey, seconded by myself. And Chris, you want to?
Mr. Blair, I just put on the table, I don't know with inflation and costs and fuel, everything else, if the council we want to consider to go ahead and add $500 to each of those two. I have to go ahead and do the full $10,000 allocation, recognizing we're in a little bit different place than we were. Maybe the committee met and just put that up for consideration. We did allocate $10,000. Yeah, that money just rolls over and it'll be there in the ending fund balance at the end of the year. But it's not like we're going to go to $11,000 next year. We'll probably still be at that 10,000. So I know this money goes to good use. I've heard Vina Moses and We Care. My staff works with them on a monthly basis, and I know that they'll use every penny that we can give them. So that I just recommend that for consideration. Increase Vina Moses contribution to 5,500 and the We Care contribution to 4,500.
Thank you, sir.
If anybody's agreeable, we can make the motion and see if it has any wind to it.
I'll make a motion.
So first we have to,
Okay.
or you can amend, make a motion to amend.
I would like to make an motion to amend then that we increase the amount for Vina Moses to 5,500 and to We Care to 4,500, getting a total of 10,000 in the water and sewer revenue allocation.
So we have a motion to amend by Councilor Nielsen and seconded by Councilor second by Councilor Bisco. And so first we're going to vote on the first amendment, on the amendment, and then we'll vote on the other. Do you want to speak to it, or do you want to?
I think we're pretty
good.
Pretty clear.
All in favor of amending the motion as stated, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. All opposed, please raise your hand and say nay. So motion carries 6-1. With that, we have a motion on the table. Any comments, questions? Councilor Andrade?
May I ask Councilor Lehman why he voted no for that? Just, I'm curious about the potential reasoning and whether that might affect my vote for this. And like a potential revisit of the previous motion.
Sure, I'm gonna vote for it. I just don't think we should give them more money than they asked for.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So all in favor of passing the motion as stated, please raise your hand, or as amended, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Your Honor, if I may.
Yes, please.
In consideration of these amounts and recognizing that the council is very aware of our housing needs in this community, I'd like to make a motion that we increase the donation to Benton Habitat for Humanity by $4,139 to $10,000 if we can take those funds from the city council.
So we have a motion on the table. And it looks like it's gonna fail to get a second. Thank you.
Well, I was just asked, do we have, can I ask a question before we fail? Just one. Go ahead.
So with that, we have a first reading of ordinance 869. I'm time check, it's 8:20 or 9:22. First reading.
This is ordinance number 869, an ordinance granting to Alyrica Networks Inc. a non-exclusive franchise for the provision of telecommunications services within the city of Philomath.
Well done. With that, are there any questions for council or Councilor Lina?
Yeah. Since we talked about this last month, I've thought on this issue quite extensively, and I just don't support it. I don't think that we should change the way we do our franchising based on the input of one company who claims that our fee structure imposed a barrier of entry to them. I disagree with that vehemently, and I don't think we should change it from the way that it has been operating.
Thank you. Did I see a second hand? Councilor Cosley?
I just wondered if Councilor Burke refresh our memory on the way it did operate in the past. I believe it was a sliding scale.
It's a percentage for a monthly minimum of 750.
And now
this would add a sliding scale, which it did not have in the past.
I'm sorry, Councilor Bissell.
So Councilor Brewer, could you also go back to the part about what the state told us about this type of franchising? I forget what you all told us in that space, but why we were considering this in the first place had some legal justification.
So there is a federal law, it's the Federal Telecommunications Act of 1996, which prohibits barriers to entry in telecommunications franchises. Councilor Lehman's point is well taken. It's not, there's nothing in the law that tells you what the barrier to entry would be. What it does do is say that you have to treat everyone the same, and in treating everyone the same, you can't have created something that is equal, but that prohibits some providers from coming into your service area.
And for the public benefit, Chris, are you able to approximate what the economic impact to the city is of this ordinance? Approximate, guesstimate?
It's going to start small and it's going to increase over time. I
A
think-
matter of $5,000?
I think what we're gonna see is that minimum monthly payment for the first year, minimum month payment for the second year. You know, that type of infrastructure is pretty expensive to put in. I don't think I'm giving any trade secrets away here, but we know Pioneer's done a big project. I don't think Alyrica wants to go away. I think they want to compete. And so they want to enter into a franchise agreement with the city so they can compete. I don't see them growing, you know, 10-fold or 20-fold over the next year. Maybe that's their business model, but I think if what we're seeing is going to be traditional of other types of franchise, it's going to grow slowly over time. And so we'll probably see these minimum payments for the first several years bumping up to that, you know, extent. And then eventually we'll be getting that 9% payment.
Okay. And Councilor Bisco?
Yep, so just a clarification, we were talking, if I recall, a difference between what we were proposing at our last meeting was $100 for that first month, is that correct? And it would have normally been $700 for that first month?
$750.
$750.
Okay, so we're talking $8,000 that we would be offsetting for that first year. And then the second year, again, can you remind me?
We changed it.
It's now
Two and three.
So 2 and 3, so the, okay, so then without going back to all of that, What's the difference between the $700 that we currently have and what we ultimately proposed at the end? Because I couldn't find those numbers easily in all these states.
Page 6. But I can
Someone-
tell you,
That
it's
would be-
200 in the first, 200 per month in year 1, 300 per month in year 2. In year 3, it goes to 7% of something.
Gross.
Or-
sales revenues, gross
Or a
revenue.
minimum of 400.
So we're looking at $10,000 for year 1 and year 2 difference that the city does not collect. I'm just gonna go back to my conversation from our last meeting, which was the enterprise zones. As I understand them, and I would like to get clarification because Mr. Workman, I think you told me that that wasn't, I think you said tax deferral. My understanding is the enterprise zone was not tax deferral, but that we would, like, we're not going to be collecting those first 3 years of enterprise zone or whatever years of enterprise zone dollars later, correct? We're just holistically giving them that. So I find it interesting that in our enterprise zone, where we're looking at bigger development, we're willing to offset the taxes fully. It's not a deferral. And we are literally talking less than $10,000 to support small communities, to align better with the Federal Telecommunications Act. In the big picture of things, I think it's a good faith effort and extension of goodwill to encourage small business to look at Philomath when we look at franchise agreements. Is it worth $10,000 for us with our enterprise zone being potentially a considerable amount less? And I'd love to know what others think.
Councilor Lehman.
Yeah, so with the enterprise zone, the city is foregoing tax revenue for a certain period of time, but it's not continuously outlaying services and costs and staff time and resources as is going to be requested of us with the franchise agreement. And that's really my only bone of contention with this, is that every time that Alyrica does an install, we have to send someone from Public Works or contract with someone to go do a underground survey before they can dig. And that's an actual cost that we're going to be incurring. And that to me is different than foregoing incremental tax revenue so as to encourage people to invest in our local community. I think that it may be, if I was Pioneer, I might even look at it a little differently, like, oh, wow, you just dropped the barrier of entry for my competition after I've been paying an established franchise fee for a very long time. And I might be a little bit upset about that.
And Council Brewer, could you just remind me about the public more so, but the process for ordinance approval? Can you just talk through that process? First reading, second.
Sure, we do a first reading. If it's not unanimous, then it will come back for second reading. That can be amended at either reading.
Sure, thank you. So with that, and on the first reading, we do a roll call vote, correct?
I have one more question.
Sure, go ahead.
So we're voting on the franchise agreement, but we're not really voting on the process of establishing what the franchise agreements will be moving forward. But that's kind of all balled up into this whole thing because, as you stated, we have to have the same rules for everybody. So we're in effect voting to revise our standard franchise agreement. Is that correct? And is that something that needs to be done? Or should it technically be done simultaneously, or should it be two different things that we're trying to do?
Well, you may have components of a franchise agreement that would not apply to every franchise holder. And that would not be a barrier to entry, it's just like it's different for one than another. The example that I can give is small cell cellular, that doesn't sound right. Where virtually everything would be above ground and it would be mounted on existing poles or things. That is going to be different than one where there's a lot of use of the right of way. And it's likely we're going to have a different discussion about what those things are. There are a couple of ways to do franchises. One of them is whether what you should be looking at is a privilege tax instead of a franchise at all. And that, yep, anybody who wants to use the right of way, they apply for a franchise agreement or a permit, but basically you have a stock amount of, here's what the privilege tax is for doing business in the right of way.
Thank you.
Very fair, because it applies exactly the same way. Right?
So with that,
And can I ask a question about the privilege tax?
oh, yes, please do.
So could you clarify exactly what that privilege tax would be and how we would be instituted?
You would adopt it by ordinance, and it would be, Eugene is the one that, Eugene and Springfield are the two cities that have been most successful, and they've had a lot of litigation, which, you know, they've won that. So what we do is look at what they do and model that. And what it allows them to do is not negotiate individual franchise agreements, worrying about what the amount is going to be at the end.
And do we have a lot of franchise holders? Is that a number? I mean, I don't know an exact number, but it would be nice to know when talking about fairness and historically what we have done as a city and how that has functioned for us, to have an idea or concept of how many franchise holders we're talking about.
Telecommunications right now, it's just Comcast and Pioneer.
Okay.
Then we've got separate franchise for like Republic Services has a waste collection franchise, and Northwest Natural has one for gas.
Electric.
Pacific Power and the other one, no.
Of consumer.
Consumers Power, thank you, consumers.
But this is related just to the
Telecommunications.
telecommunications, which are two, and are they long-term? I mean, has it been a lot of years that Telecom and Pioneer have been with?
Comcast and Pioneer been with the city for, yes, a long, couldn't go back how many years?
Okay.
Long time.
Councilor Bishop, I saw your hand up.
Yes, thank you. So I appreciate Councilor Lehman's point, but I also want to express that I believe that in our enterprise zone, when we look at how much staff time, certainly our permits and any development are not going to pay for the amount of staff time it would take to bring on a big business. So there's those unknowns of how much staff time might potentially be used when we're looking at these agreements. I think that we're going to have staff time for both of them. So that is unpaid staff time. So I do appreciate the perspective, and I think it's a valuable one, but to assume that enterprise zones and development of business don't have any expenses with them either, I think would be hard to predict at this time.
I'll just mention that I'm very much in support of the enterprise zones. I'm also very much in support of the this new ordinance that's before us today. Councilor Kazi.
If we were to revert to the prior structure, fee structure, I guess which to me seems fair. I agree with Councilor Lehman's point. I don't think it's fair to Pioneer Connect who's been paying these fees. But if we were to do that, I believe you stated at our last meeting that Alyrica is expecting these terms. Is that correct?
Well, I didn't state that, but I believe the city manager said that. However, it's an agreement, and it's also an ordinance, and that's up to the council.
Okay, thank you.
So with that, let's go ahead and do a roll call vote.
Bruce Causey,
No.
Matt Lehman,
No.
David Lowe,
Yes.
Teresa Nielsen,
No.
Jessica Andrade,
Yes.
Catherine Bisco,
No.
Chaz Jones,
Yes. So motion fails 3-4. So with that, Councilor Bisco, do you want to make a motion?
I would like to just request as a follow-up to our next ordinance meeting that we include language on that privilege tax. I voted
Do
no
you have a
because
motion?
well, I don't know. I voted no because I'm not sure that I'm clear what we're actually voting on tonight. We've got multiple layers going on here. I'd like to know what prompted this ordinance in the first place. I'm not sure that we're on the same page in that and what we're talking about tonight. And I would like to see more information on the privilege tax information that Council Brewer recommended this evening for consideration.
There would not be a second, there would not be a second reading. There's a second reading if it passes, but it's not unanimous. There's not a second reading if it fails.
Okay,
So,
so we are not coming back to this discussion anywhere.
nope.
With that, it is 9:37, and I'd like to ask the council to authorize us to continue until 10 o'clock. So it's 9:50. So I'll make a motion that we continue this meeting until 9:50. Okay, I guess so. Motion made by myself, seconded by Councilor Lowe. All in favor of that, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Motion carries unanimously. And Chris, you have a staff request that you need covered tonight.
Okay, before we go there, can I ask for some direction on reaching back out to Alyrica from the council? So, and I'll maybe answer the question. So Alyrica has come to the city and said they'd like to establish a franchise with the city so they can operate their business in the city. We've just looked at an ordinance and said no to that agreement. The council like me to re-engage with Alyrica or just report back that we've said no? My preference would be that we report back with an alternative or something else to discuss with them. Do we send back the original one? The current telecommunications, although the current one was updated for more than just the schedule, there were other updates and other things put. So I'm looking for some additional direction on how you'd like me to report to Alyrica on the council's decision.
Councilor Cosmo.
I'd like to move that we approach Alyrica with a franchise agreement that has the appropriate updates and the current fee schedule. Does that make sense?
Second.
So we have a motion by Councilor Kazi and seconded by Councilor Lehman. Do you want to speak to that?
No, I think it's probably understood by the council.
Any questions, comments? See, Councilor Lowe.
So, city manager, so if this passes, take it back to the Alyrica, then the ball's in their court, right?
Yes, they can decide whether they want to continue to pursue a franchise with the city or not.
And I'll just add that the fact that Alyrica is kind of a homegrown business, I really like the idea that we would have, tried to encourage them to do business in Philomath. Yeah, so for that, yeah, I just wanted to mention that. That sits heavy with me, but Councilor Lehman.
Yeah, I just like to state that I'm all for Alyrica doing business in Philomath. I know lots of people that work there. It's a great company. I used to utilize their services. I don't anymore. I have nothing but positive things to say about Alyrica. I also view Pioneer as a local business, and they've been here for a long time. And I've utilized their services as well and have nothing but positive things to say about them. I don't think that we need to view this as a A versus B scenario. I think we just need to make sure that everybody's playing by the same rules. That's my motivation.
Councilor Kazi.
I don't believe for a minute that the current fee structure would preclude Alyrica from entering into a franchise agreement with the city.
So I think it would be presumptuous for us to assume that Alyrica is on the same playing field as our other businesses without more information. When we talk about playing on the same or the level playing field, we literally just approved funding for water and utilities expenditures for folks who are on a different level. So if we don't really know that Alyrica and Pioneer and Comcast are on the same, I just feel like this is a vote that was premature. And I believe that we would actually be coming back and having further conversation with my vote. And now I am even more conflicted because I still feel like we're acting without all of the information we need to make the best decision to align with the federal telecommunications requirements. It just seems like we're missing pieces here, and I would really actually prefer we come back with a bigger conversation or more information. But to just decide that we don't think that Alyrica is not playing in this, that they are the same business with the same obligations, is just a place that I don't think we have the authority to do. And we have been approached and asked about this agreement. As I understand it, I would like to at least honor the fact that they have asked for that. And I just feel like we're prematurely making decisions without information fully provided.
I think that, this was before us at a work session, wasn't it? Before, we had a pretty extensive conversation at a work session. The city businesses to make decisions and set policy. I believe that we have as much information as we would ever expect to have for this, considering that we did a work session and had this conversation tonight, and then you did choose to vote against it. I mean, you could always make a motion to reconsider. That's something you have the power to do, but to say we don't have enough information, I feel like it's not what
I said I feel, I didn't say we did.
but I'm not, you can,
It's different.
that's great. So anyway, I think we all have options. But yeah, I saw, so we have a motion on the table. And it's been seconded. So Councilor Andrade.
Thank you. I guess I don't know if this is true, but I think Councilor Bisco's mostly talking about the privilege tax, and I am not quite clear about how that works either, or how that might be incorporated into this. If we talked about it before, I don't know what to say. I just can't seem to find information on that. But also, telecommunications is super important equitably, or in an equity sense, being able to get information. And as Councilor Bisco said, who's to say, like, we don't have enough information on what Alyrica can and can't afford, and what kinds of programs they may have in, like, for people who, might be low income or something like that. I'm not saying that they have that program, but who knows, they might. So I don't think we should be making a decision based on an assumption of their ability to pay for something.
So we have a motion on the table to bring this, to bring the original modified version of the franchise agreement back to Alyrica with the original fee structure that was originally in the original franchise agreement. So all in favor of bringing that back to Alyrica and asking staff to do that for us, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. All opposed, please raise your hand and say nay. Any abstentions?
I abstain.
Okay, so we have a motion carries 4 to 2 to 1.
Thank you. I will report back. I do just have a couple things on the report. And due to time, I'll kind of cut some of this short. I've got a International City Managers Association conference. It's out of state. My contract says I need to run that by the council and get your thumbs up prior to going out of state on city business. It's
Hawaii.
Is that important? Puerto Rico State. No, it's in Ohio. It's in Ohio.
No problem.
Well, I'm going to come back. Is that
So we don't need a motion.
I don't need a motion. I just need consensus that I'm okay to go to ICMA conference this year in Ohio. Thank you. I do want to hit with the public that's still here. Part of my report, skipping down with some of the planning stuff. I do want to give just a brief update on the property line adjustments for Mill Pond Crossing subdivision. Spoke with the engineer last week. Requested from the city that we provide the original applications, which have the owner signatures on them, in addition to the decisions. Originally, we'd provided all the decisions for the PLAs. And the engineer who's ordering the survey said what they really need is something signed by the property owners in order to proceed. So that was given to them this morning. Had staff scan those and got those emailed over. So the engineering firm has been paid in full from past services. That was part of the reason that work wasn't going forward. They've been paid in full. The survey has been ordered, and city staff has gone out of the way to make sure they have what they need so they can proceed with those surveys. So that is the next step. I don't have more of an update as far as the time frame that's going to require, but I would imagine within the next couple of weeks, you'll probably see surveyors on the property taking care of those. They're doing individual surveys with new legal descriptions for each property. Those will be given to you individually. And then they'll also be doing one master survey that has all of the lot line adjustments completed, so that can go to the county and get recorded. The next step from the city standpoint is going to be to get the recordings of all of those, or all those documents recorded. And then also we included in our decision that we need to see proof of compensation where square footage was lost because of the lot line adjustments. So once we receive both of those, we'll essentially close our planning files and consider those lot line adjustments made. Once they're recorded, it's really done. The city's just going to double check compensation's been taken care of, which we don't typically do, but in this case felt it was important based on circumstances. So that's included. Switching subdivisions, North 11th Street, sounds like we're going to talk about a little bit more as well. Did reach out to Mr. Dowd, who's the developer of Heather Glen, and let him know that the city was not going to proceed with the local improvement district. He asked if the engineering had been completed. I stated that the engineering had been completed by the city. So he requested that. I put in that request to send him the engineering. I've not heard back. I'm assuming that this is going to be a next year project, just based on the time frame of when the city decided to not move forward the LID. Already pretty much into summer. So for him to put a bid together, get a contractor on board, everything else, everybody's busy. So I'm making a little bit of assumption here to say that that's probably not going to happen between now and when it starts to rain next month. That's probably going to be a next year project. But I will get more specific timeframes from Mr. Dowd once he's got that lined out. I've also requested that the city engineer cipher off from the total engineering, just the sidewalk and any of the needed stormwater on the west side of the road as the city council directed. I'm waiting for a timeline on when that can be done and an RFP be presented. I'm not holding my breath. I'd like for that project to happen still before it starts getting too wet. But again, that project might have to wait until next spring. So it'd go out for bid this winter and have construction early as soon as we can out in the spring. So that's a report on North 11th Street development. And a couple other things on there, but I'll let me look real quick here if I might. Streetscapes, let me just put a date out there, talk to the contractor. They don't have signed documents from ODOT yet. The date I was given, which is the date they were given, which is the date somebody else is given, September 26th, they're supposed to get documents from ODOT to sign. And then they've got to give 30 days notice to the utilities, between 2 weeks and 30 days, depending on who's getting notice, but they've got another 30 days after that date before they can be on site. So we're still looking at a couple of months out, month and a half, 2 months out before we anticipate seeing anybody in Philomath on the streetscape project. The reservoir project, engineering is getting completing, RFP is being prepared. I anticipate the RFP going out within the next 2 weeks, and we'll get somebody under contract and really trying to get up out of the ground before it starts to get too wet, so that they can work throughout the winter. Engineers are working hard to try to get that out there. Public Works, Police, Finance, audits underway. I think that'll be good for this evening, Your Honor. Thanks.
Thank you. If we have questions, I just want to get a consensus. People okay with going till 10 o'clock? Just shake your head no if you're not.
Let me ask a question.
Yes. Yes.
That proof of compensation for the mill pond. I understand the city's getting this time. What is the, will there be progress on other phases before that proof of compensation is received? I mean, that other phases that that want to go forward on Mill Pond?
So the condition of approval for Mill Pond is that no pre-engineering, pre-construction, no meetings or pre-development meetings will be held for phase 3 until phase 1, 2, and 2B have been satisfied to the city's satisfaction. So phase, every incentive is to tie up all these loose ends on 2 and 2B.
Okay, which would include that piece you just talked about.
We are seeing, Mr. Miller has applied for and received permits for additional homes in phase 2B. And there's actually a home in phase 1, which is right there on the corner of Timothy and 15th Street that was passed over. They were going to do a smaller home there, and now they've come back, decided to do a 2-story home there after all. So there are permits that are being issued for the other lots that are in phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 2B. Those are happening at the same time that the lot line adjustments are being dealt with.
With respect to West 11th Street and Heather Glen, would it be possible to get an update every council meeting, every regular meeting, just as to if progress has been made or anything? Since it is such a concern of folks that live there and that agreement, I think it'd be helpful if council gets this, whatever is happening, we know.
You bet.
Councilor Biscoe.
Yes, so we're talking kind of 2 different topics actually between the councilors here, which is North 11th Street and also Mill Pond Crossing. I know there's been conversation about performance bonds. I would be interested, so especially the North 11th Street, as we're wrapping up that last home being built. That performance bond really is our assurance that this work actually will get done. Is that something that the council can get a copy of? I'd be interested in reviewing both the performance bond for North 11th and Mill Pond Crossing, since it is directly impacting what's going on in these developments.
There's the performance, the bond that was taken out by Heather Glen subdivision was for the public works improvements that they were going to be doing on their own. So Pippa Lane, water line, sewer line, storm drain, streetlights, sidewalks. It did not include the improvements that were going to take place out on 11th Street because those were going to be done as part of the future North 11th Street improvements.
So the performance bond does not cover,
The city accepted Pippa Lane over a year ago. So that work's been done, approved by the city. They're past the warranty period on all the improvements on Pippa Lane. So
So just to clarify then, that what are we calling the bond that we have then? I would have assumed the performance bond would have ensured all of that infrastructure was completed for that project. Is it a different kind of bond? Is that what I'm hearing? Or is it we just didn't get a bond that covered all of the infrastructure that would have been part of Heather Glen?
it's a construction bond for Heather Glen that did not include improvements to 11th Street. For the work that they were completing, not the work that the city was going to complete.
So is that a document that can be available for review?
Sure.
And the outstanding North 11th Street, there's no then security or assurance that that will get done since it's not part of that bond?
We've got conditions of approval from the original subdivision approval that state it has to be done. So that's what the city will lean on to ensure that that work gets completed.
And then the other part of my request was similarly the performance bond for Mill Pond Crossing, since we have outstanding infrastructure there as well.
Yeah, it's been renewed a couple times. I can get a version of the most recent update to the council.
Thank you.
Councilor Nielsen.
Yeah, could you explain the condition of approval and how that works as far as maintaining that integrity of them finishing North 11th? I'd like to understand that better.
The condition of approval states that just amongst other things, states all the infrastructure needs to put in has to be put into the city's public works design standards. And so listed in there, it says improvements along 11th Street shall be completed as well.
And is there any condition, sorry, a follow-up question. Is there any condition if those conditions are not met, is there any ramifications for that?
Yeah, we would seek legal ramifications. So we would go through legal channels to enforce that conditional approval.
Thank you.
I would just state, Mr. Dowd's not here, so to be fair, I've never had a conversation with Mr. Dowd where he implied that he was not going to proceed with improvements to North 11th Street. It's been just the opposite. Mr. Dowd has grown a little impatient with the city on taking so long to decide we were going to move forward or not. And I will just say, well, I won't speak for him. I will say for myself, I think that there's a little level of frustration where he was in a position to do the improvements 3 years ago, was told not to because we were going to proceed with a local improvement district on North 11th Street and do all those improvements as a whole. And now 3 years later, the city said, we're not going to do those improvements as a whole, but you're now responsible to do your portion of them on your own. That I would argue substantially increased price or cost to him 3 years down the road. So I've not had a direct conversation with him looking at those dollars and cents. I don't know what his cost estimates are today from what they were 3 years ago. But I would imagine those are very different numbers than what they were 3 years ago.
Absolutely.
But I've not heard anything from him stating he's not going to move forward with those improvements.
And Councilor Andrade?
To clarify, we didn't actually state any sort of intent to move forward with improving North 11th Street until this council, correct? From what I remember there being a conversation in which there was debate over whether we had actually agreed to move forward with improving North 11th Street. And I can't remember if that was specific to a local improvement district or not. Does anyone remember?
That was in our strategic plan for a number of years to improve it. And so it
Yes,
wasn't.
it was, but I meant like
Sorry, you're interrupting again. It was in our strategic plan. It wasn't that we had approved it, but we had approved our strategic plan and we had plans to do it. So I think the logical conclusion is that it was moving forward. Councilor Lehman?
Yeah, we also budgeted for it. And so we had that discussion. It was part of our capital improvement plan. And it's in the budget. So it's not coming out of nowhere. And it's been in the budget for a long time.
Councilor Pazzi?
I just wanted to mention that my recollection was in a council meeting 6 to 8 months ago. I think Councilor Rowe asked if we as a council wanted to move forward, and we voted in agreement. It was not specific to the LID, but to the project was.
Thank you for that clarification, Councilor Kazi.
And now it's 10:10. I'm sorry, it's 10 o'clock. Can I get a nod of heads to go until 10:05?
May I suggest that we take Councilor Biscott's question and then adjourn?
Can I
Thank you,
get a
Councilor
motion?
Crosby.
Yeah. Go ahead, Councilor Biscoe.
So I'm concerned that we would string along a developer on a potential local improvement district that was not approved to move forward by the council officially, leaving us in this space that we're 2019 when this infrastructure should have been done. It wasn't done. It feels like I don't know how that could possibly be best practices. So we can have all kinds of things on our strategic plan that we never quite get to. So to have a developer dependent on a contingency, it seems like a flawed either policy or procedure, and one that I will just come back to. The local improvement district is a bigger one for, I think it's 40+ streets in this community. I think we need to just do better in this space. And I think tonight points to that.
Just to answer that, and then we can wrap up. The developer had the option to put the infrastructure in place at the time, or to wait until the city moved forward with the local improvement district, as was placed in the strategic plan, as was in the capital improvement plan. et cetera, as we talked about tonight. The developer chose to not put the infrastructure in place, but to delay because it was going to be financially beneficial to do it as a large project rather than do it individually at that time. So not to be too blunt, there's, you know, it's, there's a little danger here in looking 3 years down the road and looking back at a decision 3 years ago and saying, well, that didn't make a lot of sense 3 years ago. For a developer standpoint, from the city staff perspective, it made a lot of sense to wait and not do it now, wait till the large group and the large project goes through. Every indication was that project was going to happen at the time. Knowing what we know today, he would probably make a different decision and staff would probably advise him differently. That was the decision made 3 years ago.
But he did make the decision informed on his own by the sounds of it.
Yes.
Well, thank you all for being here tonight. Really appreciate it.
Excuse me.
We are adjourned.
May I please, really? I just want, can we please reopen? I have a quick announcement to make. Please? You're muted, so if you're talking. Okay,
The meeting's adjourned. Go ahead and just send an email out.
the problem is that it's to the public. Okay. Very disappointing once again.